talk about something that's, well, pretty fundamental to any democracy: the integrity of the courts. Today, we're taking a deeper look at the Indian judiciary. You know, when you hear the phrase judicial corruption, a certain image probably pops into your head. But we're going to go way beyond the headlines to break down what it really means and where the true challenges are.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to expand our whole idea of what corruption even means in this context. Spoiler, it's not just about bags of cash. Then we'll take a look at the 3 different levels of the court system, because the problems look very different depending on where you are. After that, we'll dig into the design of the system itself, figure out the root causes of these issues, and finally pull it all together for the bigger picture. All right, let's dive in.
So first things first, more than just bribes. To really get a handle on this, we have to start by widening our lens. When we talk about corruption in the judiciary, it is about so much more than just money changing hands under the table.
Yeah, let's just ask that question point blank. What does judicial corruption actually mean? For a lot of us, the first thing that comes to mind is a judge taking a bribe. But honestly, that's just the very tip of a much, much larger iceberg.
See, the real definition is way broader. Of course, it includes bribery. But you've also got these more subtle, systemic things, like undue influence or nepotism, favoritism in who gets appointed as a judge. It could be deliberately messing with case schedules, or that really tricky ethical area of judges taking up government jobs almost immediately after they retire. Understanding this full scope is absolutely key. Okay, so that brings us to the 3-tiered system. To really see where the risks are, you have to understand how the judiciary is structured. It's not just one big thing. The challenges and the vulnerabilities are totally different depending on which level of the system you're talking about. This table really lays it all out for us. You can see right away it's not a one-size-fits-all problem. Down in the lower courts, the big worries are about things like direct bribery and just endless delays. But look what happens as you go up, to the high courts and especially the Supreme Court. The issue shifts from cash to things like influence, favoritism, and a real lack of transparency. Let's break down each one. First up, the lower courts. This is really the front line of the justice system, where judges have direct, daily contact with ordinary people. And the workload here is just immense. That huge pressure creates an environment where, frankly, most of the direct corruption allegations pop up. Things like paying what's called speed money just to get a hearing date, or worse, bribes for getting bail. Now, when we move up a level to the high courts, the picture changes quite a bit. Outright bribery allegations, very, very rare. The concerns here become more subtle, more institutional. We're talking about the potential for favoritism, like who decides which judge gets which case, or controversies around things like administrative power and the transfer of judges from one court to another. And then we get to the very top, the Supreme Court. Here, any talk of direct personal corruption is almost unheard of. Instead, the focus is squarely on the system itself. We're talking about major institutional questions, like the Chief Justice's immense power as the master of the roster to assign cases, or the secrecy around how judges are even appointed in the first place, and maybe most importantly, the perception of outside influence in big, politically sensitive cases. All this talk about systemic issues brings us right to our next section, the system itself. This is where we shift our focus from maybe the actions of a few individuals to the actual design and the potential flaws of the very systems that are supposed to guarantee justice for everyone. Which leads to this really fundamental question, right? Are we just dealing with a few bad apples here and there? A few individuals making bad choices? Or is the problem with the barrel itself? Is the institutional design actually creating the conditions for these problems to exist? And a perfect example of this is the collegium system. This is basically how senior judges get appointed in India. It's a system of judges appointing other judges. Think of it like an internal promotion committee for the highest courts. Now, the idea is to keep politics out of it, to protect judicial independence. But the big criticism is that it's a total black box. Decisions are made behind closed doors, and there are no clear public reasons given for who gets picked and why. And this whole tension just exploded back in 2015. The government tried to bring in a new system called the NJAC, which would have had government figures, like the law minister, involved in appointing judges. But the Supreme Court struck it down, saying it was a threat to their independence. And that one moment perfectly captures the debate we're still having today. How do you balance that crucial need for judicial independence with the equally important need for public accountability? And here's another one of those systemic issues. What happens right after a judge retires? There's this recurring concern when judges accept high-profile government jobs immediately after they leave the bench. It just raises this unavoidable and pretty uncomfortable question.
Could the hope of getting a nice job after retirement have somehow influenced their decisions on government cases while they were still a judge? It's a huge potential conflict of interest.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the different kinds of problems. Now let's get into the root causes and, more importantly, some of the potential solutions that are out there.
Just look at this number. It's staggering. Over 40 million cases are currently pending in Indian courts. That massive backlog isn't just a statistic. It creates unbelievable pressure on the entire system. When things are that slow and overloaded, it creates the perfect breeding ground for corruption, where delays can be bought and sold, and paying speed money starts to look like a pretty tempting option.
So, what's the fix? Well, there are a few big ideas that get talked about a lot. Things like digitizing everything, moving to e-courts to make processes cleaner and reduce chances for funny business. Randomizing which judge gets which case, so you can't have favoritism. There's also a big push for that mandatory cooling-off period for retired judges we talked about. And of course, trying to make the collegium more transparent by forcing it to actually publish the reasons for its decisions. And that brings us to our final section, the bigger picture. It's time to pull all these different threads together and try to land on a more thoughtful, more nuanced conclusion. So after all of this, what's the real takeaway? It's very easy to just throw your hands up and say the whole system is corrupt. But the reality, as we've seen, is a lot more complex. It's really a story of two different challenges happening at the same time. You have these very specific, localized corruption risks, especially at the lower levels, combined with these huge systemic gaps in transparency and accountability right at the very top. And really, it all leaves us with this one fundamental question. It's a question that every healthy democracy has to keep asking itself over and over. How do you strike that perfect, delicate balance? How do you protect the independence of your judges, which is absolutely vital for justice, while also making sure that the entire system is accountable to the very public it's meant to serve? There's no easy answer, and that, right there, is the central challenge.